So,
Hi, my name is Peter Forshaw. I'm the Managing Director for Maxwell Stevens. I'm delighted to have Mark Haynes with me today. Mark and myself haven't known each other particularly long, but I came across his profile on LinkedIn. We exchanged a few messages, and here we are today. So for everyone who hasn't seen Mark's profile, the headline facts are insight, adaptation, and porosity. Hi, Mark.
hi, how you doing, Peter?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you ever so much for doing this. Both myself and Mark had a really interesting chat on the phone and put the world to rights about sort of the current situation. So, Mark, how are you enjoying the lack of commute at the moment?
Fantastic. Never really did too much anyway, but the really frustrating thing is that I'm a petrol head. This whole household's a petrol head. And after about 14 years, at the end of last year, I sadly let go of my old my Mark IV R32 Golf with 137,000 miles on it, and thought, well, I'm not doing the miles anymore, so I probably don't need something so much fun to drive. But I'll replace it with something as black and 3 times the size and still German and 4-wheel drive, and since then done about 3,000 miles. So the commute's been great. It's usually been around the back garden and down to the shop for a few extra beers.
What's the new normal in your world?
I do promise I will shoot anybody that said new norm again in my face, because I don't think there's such a beast. We've just got our different and evolving minute-by-minute interpretations of what we think it might look like next. New normal, wow. I've got to say, I think the one thing that people have got from this is a lot more thinking space, away from some of the noises and distractions of their old normal world, particularly working world. I used to have an awful lot of interactions with businesses that were looking to, I'm just going to throw some silly words in here for fluff, Peter, wanted to introduce some assisted serendipity to get people talking to each other and come up with great ideas and the next big innovation. But really, it just became a very, very big distraction. And it seems like, for myself, a lot of newer thinking, fresher thinking, and different conversations have come out of having the time to do that. Not just from the commute, but not being in somebody else's workspace and headspace all the time.
Even though we're not sort of together, and this was thrown on, like probably yourself, the 23rd of March, I'll never forget that date. It was 27 and a half weeks ago, forgive me if I've got that sort of. do you, so we've all been stuck at home, we're all Zooming and FaceTiming and Teamsing and all that sort of good stuff. Do you think that people have actually used that time as thinking time and will come up with some new ideas? Or do you still think we're maybe even too busy, even doing what we're doing from home rather than the office?
Very good question, Peter. You said I have an opinion. I am a little bit opinionated about that. I think I believe there's an awful lot of people looking very, very busy, trying to hang on to positions and finding things to do, over-zooming, if that's a thing. I think there's a lot of fatigue coming out of that, which I think is ripping a lot of time away from people. I think the realization that people are coming to is that they are going to feel better if they make time to think about things differently and a bit more deeply. Whether they actually need to kickstart that themselves or not, I'm not too sure. But it's a bit like that, where does innovation come from? You don't put a sign over a building and say, this is the innovation centre, walk through the door and you become what? Innovative. If somebody comes up with that great idea at 2 o'clock in the morning and they've just got in from a night out, you're not allowed to share that good idea with your business, your team, or whatever. Of course you are. Your thinking is almost any time, any place, anywhere, much as the way we're beginning to work now. So I don't know that it's necessarily had that much time. 27 and a half weeks doesn't seem like an awful lot of time for that level of habit to change, to get people into thinking more freely without having to think about thinking.
I mean, clearly, Mark, you're a thinker yourself. I'll just read some more of your LinkedIn profile for the viewers, if that's okay. So, curious about the porous future of work, passionate about change and agility, assisted serendipity and high performance work venues. Sorry about my phone going off. Tell us about the porous future of work.
Okay, this comes from a lot of trust and choice-driven thinking. Maybe COVID-19 has been a little bit of a kickstart, only a little kickstart to some different approaches and attitudes to going to work and where it's done and how you do it. And rather than having so much of your work done in a space where it is prescribed by the employer, they've created their bit of corporate real estate for you, and they put the kitchenette in and the lounges and the what have you, all very nice. But would you actually choose that setting yourself? So now we have the opportunity to make some of those choices. And I know that some employers are giving their people the opportunity to go and work in different venues with like WeWork vouchers and go and join your local little business community clubhouse, because it gives you an alternative environment away from home. And all of that becomes potentially a little bit disjointed, and maybe some managers out there are a little bit fearful of that. But as we see some of the big corporates beginning to realise that repurposing some of their surplus space in a type of environment and opening it out a little bit wider so that the local and business community can get involved in that space and hence engage with each other, that tends to throw this thing into, I call it porosity. It's no longer having the corporate walls in space, as we touched on the other day. If a guy from Deloitte and a guy from KPMG sit down in the same coffee house and they're working on different projects next to each other, they're not worried, but their bosses would probably be terrified by that. So somehow overcoming that, being trusting, giving the consumer of the space, the user, the employee, the freelancer, the opportunity to make those choices will drive a lot more porosity in space. And when we tend to zoom out of that a little bit more and think about how do you get to blend this with the public realm and some of the space that's suffering there, libraries, university space, sorry, maybe not university spaces, museums, town halls, whatever. There's an awful lot of bricks and mortar there that's just getting a little bit dusty at the moment, just as there is a lot of corporate real estate footprint.
Yeah.
So the porosity is the bit about people navigating the spaces in between all the barriers that are put in place by the people that own or currently control the places around where we work or meet or convene or learn or burn, earn, learn, burn, if you like. That dissolves, that is dissolving a little bit, and people are navigating their own way through that. And those pathways are those sort of very, very open, fluid, sinuous, porous routes to people getting together on their terms to do the work they want, with who they want, when they want to. And not just work, all the other stuff.
And in terms of what you do for your clients, is that you give them the ability to be able to do that?
I'd like to say yes, but that's not really quite how it works. They come to that realization that something like that might be good to them. And initially, a lot of my work starts with, hi, Mark, we've got a couple of buildings. We want to condense them into one. Can you come up with a plan so that everybody is happy and satisfied? I smile sweetly and say yes to myself, meaning no. And then the conversation begins. How do you want your people to be in a position where they can better serve the external clients, make them happy, because the external client pays everybody's wages? If you don't get that right or start with those questions, just doing a lot of amazing, pretty designs around agile working, activity-based working, pods and snooks and sofas and whatever you, are just prescribed design and will be trendy and of a moment. That's maybe not what the working community is chasing. And maybe some of these things seem to be perks, along with agile and flexible and all of those other words, which still need a little bit of clarification in my mind. But really, it's just about being able to work with people that are prepared to understand that they may not always know how to ask the question or even what the question is. So they tend to ask the question that they're comfortable with. How do I get more people into their space? How do I get more innovation? How do I get people to connect with each other better? How do I get people to want to come to work? Taking out a few desks and putting some sofas in isn't necessarily it. It's what inspires those people. And if choice and trust inspires them, that doesn't necessarily need a change of furniture or footprint of building. A small example, web marketing company in the Northeast, a company called Visualsoft, people can look them up, run by a guy called Dean Benson, top lad. Got the opportunity to work with Dean and moving from, sure he won't mind me saying, a bit of a crumbly old 100-room hotel office space which wasn't working for them, into a new floor plate or two of a building that he acquired. He kind of has this ridiculous Uber trust model of his people and says, even before Branson started to throw his carrot around, you can take whatever time off you want, you can work wherever you want. Just make sure everything you do delights the people that pay for all of this. Because without them, we don't really have a business. And I think they have a pretty low staff turnover. They have enormous confidence as a business. They have grown very, very well. And I think they have a leadership style that goes beyond how do I get 300 people into a building the most cost-effective way. When I look at others that have tried the same thing, and going back to one of my earlier points, let's take 3 buildings, see if we can get them down to 1, get everybody together, because that's good for us. What Dean did is what's good for them.
Yeah.
And we're looking outside of the building.
So what are the current trends that are going to allow people in the industry, the profession, you know, the workplace going forward, that's going to allow them to delight the people that pay for all of this?
You mean, how do we make that happen?
Yeah.
You get them to ask different questions. You get them to believe the answers and trust the people that are paid some tens of thousands of pounds a year to do things for your business, to make that happy client. Trust that they're telling you something truthful and not just saying what you want to hear. We touched on a thing the other day too, Peter, talking about the exit polls from people joining some of the big financial services companies. And some of the postgrads saying, what I really aspire to is my own corner office. And some of them saying, I'd really just like to make tea for the guy that runs the whole show, because that's where the big thinking is, that's where the great learning is, and that's where the opportunity is. So the tool that this sector has to service its client better is its ability to think and not go with what it knows, not to go with a regurgitated hybrid version of what it did before, maybe 40% sofas instead of 35. It's thinking differently and genuinely about it and being authentic and honest with the people who ultimately are going to be, I guess, laundering the money between what the client pays an organisation and what the organisation gives the employee, and having them realise that if it's just going to be about the money, too many of the decisions are going to be made about the money. Can we buy it cheaper? Can we get it quicker? Do we have to do all of that? But that's where the conversation starts to get big. When organisations say, that's a great design, Mark, it's X tens of hundreds of pounds per square foot, can we do it for a bit less? You say, yeah. Do you even need to do anything? Because so many times the people that are paid for designing and delivering spaces wouldn't really be very comfortable saying to their potential customer who's going to pay for their next Bermudan holiday, maybe you don't have to do anything at all. Maybe I don't have to do anything for you. Maybe that's just a little bit too much honesty for some people. Now, I'm sorry, that sounded rude of me. I wouldn't condemn the way people treat their potential clients. But if you move prospect from that language to opportunity to help and be useful, you and many people like you, Peter, know that the more you give, the more you offer, the more you make authentically available, the much more likely you're going to be rewarded for that. And it's going to be on mutual terms. It's not going to be a paycheck for a piece of work.
I think genuinely they'll remember you as well. They'll trust you. I don't see any downside into giving someone something and potentially not expecting anything back to start with. I know you agree the same. So what's the next big idea?
I've got to put that out here for everybody. Come and find me and ask me and pay me for it. No. The next big idea. Well, first, it's not mine. I think a lot of the next big ideas come from a collective. I find a lot of my ideas come out of conversations I have with people on LinkedIn that I've never met and probably never will. They're not necessarily just the movers and shakers in a sector. They are sometimes people that just jump into a conversation and see something differently. And a lot of the good thinking comes from jumping in front of that train of thought that's bowling on down its line, because that's how they got to that point last time. How do we make Great Britain great? We put a pair of metal rods up the middle of the country and we put an old train on it. It's kind of old technology to solve a future communication problem. So the next big thing I identify with most closely at the moment is that corporate real estate needs to stop being owned by the pension funds and start being owned by the people that pay the wages of the people to do the jobs in those spaces. And I think the pension funds have got some shocks coming. I think a lot of property companies have got some big shocks coming. I think co-working will evolve into something much more enormous as a sector, and free choice of where that where the consumer of that space goes and how they engage with it, even to the point, as I put in one of my posts about 4 or 5 years ago, if you had to pay your employer for your desk, what would it be worth? If you pay £50,000 a year for working in London, knowing that your desk costs your employer 15k a year to put there, would you sooner have a little bit of that money and maybe work from home 3 days a week? What are we doing? Employers not giving you a rebate and not closing offices down, so something else must be happening. And that'll be that the higher level investors want those buildings returning rental revenue. They want conventional leases. The big change is that the conventional lease model will have to give way. It will have to yield to what will be the new consumers of space transactional model. And that is my choice. I want to go and work in ABC place today because I'm meeting with these 3 guys from these other 4 companies. I don't need to be getting on the train and going to my corporate facility to do that. So why would I be expected to be paying for that? People in the building behind you and your image there that we were talking about earlier, one of the things I suggested to them was that they didn't take any more space, that they actually reduced their footprint by about a half, saving them X tens of thousands of pounds a year, take 1/2 of that money and give it as co-working space vouchers to their people, allowing them to choose when and where they worked. Given that they only had about a 38% occupancy of those spaces in EC3 anyway, that horrified them.
Did they do it in the end?
I'm not aware so.
So they're stuck with their existing space, still happy with 38% occupancy?
Yeah, I'm afraid I've lost touch with those guys because I didn't actually deliver any projects to that building. I did in other parts of the country. But that part of the world, EC3, is a little bit different anyway, because a lot of people working there spend a lot of their time in the boozer after a 2-hour session with the guy at Lloyd's of London. So actual at-desk time, occupying that prime, lovely, big, look at us, we're here with this postcode and this address, financial services and insurance industry, is probably for a long time, and will continue for quite a while, Peter, be prepared to pay for that presence.
Yeah, I think
eyes on them.
Companies in London
is probably quite different.
Companies in London and the city are too competitive. They will, my understanding and my view is that they will have the full floor plate, just as you said, we're here, come and look at us.
Yeah, it is a big comfort thing, and until something in the mindset of their client changes, I don't know. Can you imagine saying to somebody that worked in that environment in the city, trading at those levels, saying to their client, who could invest millions or billions with them, hey, look, we're all going to be working from home now, so I won't be able to buy you so many boozy lunches. I'm sure you'll be all right with that because it's all a very authentic thing. And these people are going to go, yeah, you what now?
Yeah.
It's got to be how it's got to be. That's what I want. That's my expectation. Now, if you stop and ask, as Dean Benson at Visualsoft did, what does the customer want? What does the external client expect of us? What do they want us to look like? How do they feel about the way we act and behave as an organisation? Not just servicing their account or their business, but are we credible, viable, robust, authentic, and all of those other things? And that's where some of the new feel-good comes from. And people will maybe not always pay a premium for feel-good, but it'll be an easier decision.
Sorry, Mark, I'm just taking notes of everything you're saying. Liquid gold, as they say.
Good luck with that.
Any advice for people who need to sit down and think more, but don't feel like they've got the time? I mean, how would you advise someone who needs to sort of contemplate some of the world's bigger problems? How do they fit it in their day?
You do the ironing at home?
Do I do any ironing at home?
Yeah.
Weirdly, I do all of the families, and the majority of it. That's
good man. That's made my wife smile on the other side of the room. So what do you do when you're ironing? I mean, apart from ironing, what do you do?
So I do it differently. I just iron one item and then put the iron away, so I just iron to go, should I say, rather than ironing loads of stuff. Okay, well maybe that was the wrong question for me to ask you. I do a chunk of the ironing. I quite enjoy it. I find it a little bit strangely cathartic, and I'll generally have some TV on or a radio play or something in the background. And I suppose it's a little like I alluded to earlier about jumping in front of that train of thought. If you're there ironing and you see it as a chore, or even if you really enjoy doing it, it's just ironing. If you're doing something else at the same time, maybe not because the multitasking makes you think differently, but it does allow you to defocus a little bit from one thing. And if you can stop people thinking about one thing so hard, little corners of their mind, little doors open and other things come in. And if you're prepared to let them in and let them bang around a little bit and bump into each other, you start to have new thoughts. Well, I think I need to do let's find together now.
But, you know, it applies to anything. If you're bumming up and down the motorway in a car for 45 minutes a day, because I really believe motorways are just there to make sure that everybody's in the wrong place at each end of the day, and you think differently when you're doing different activities. A policeman once said to me, I should not worry about the fact that when I reported that an elderly gentleman had been knocked down at a pedestrian crossing as the car passing me went through the red light, I couldn't recall what the last 3 traffic light colours were. And he said, you're driving on autopilot, there's not really anything wrong with that. You would have been aware of red and you probably would have stopped. Somebody else wasn't concentrating. So being able to do that subconsciously automatically signals to you that you're capable of thinking about other things. Perhaps we're not very good at using mobile phones or trying to eat takeaway sandwiches or whatever while we're driving, but the brain, we don't use anything like enough of it, and we do have enough time, believe it or not. It's just not always being a prescriptive, I need to sit down and think about that, because it's probably not going to happen. Try something really, really deeply patterned and complicated, and you will find a lot of new ideas popping into your head, largely to counter the fear of cutting round the corner with that 60-pounder roll stuff. Yeah. Speaking from experience.
That's great. And what's just picking your brains really, Mark, more than anything else. So what's the best advice you've ever been given?
Ooh. I suppose I ought to say, given the other company in this room at the moment, yes, definitely marry her. Best bit of advice. My godfather, bless him, said to me, and everybody that knows me will get this, just shut up and listen a bit more. Now my desk is literally rocking as my wife is chuckling. Hard thing to admit, but it is true.
Yeah. I think if you're going out there and forcing yourself to sort of speak to clients and all the rest of it, it is quite difficult to actually stop and listen. You do need to force yourself to do it. Yeah,
you do, absolutely. And I think a lot of this comes in in preparation, as you guys do very well when you set up some of the conversations you do. I probably shouldn't say this on air, but I'd say I'm a professional winger, but that just comes from a lot of time doing something and trying to do it differently each time because it's so specifically relevant to the customer or the opportunity that I'm having that conversation with, which is why I'll always start with, do you have an opportunity to do nothing? I almost want people to prove to me that they have to do something before we all invest the time in trying to figure out the best way about thinking our way to a solution. So preparation, definitely. Finding some things out about the change that the organisation you're working with has got to go through, that's commercial, business or personally critical to them, and understand the depth of that motivation. A bit like I asked you, why do you do these sessions? And your answer was spot on. It's because you want to, you believe it's right, and it's useful for people, you have the time to do it. It's not a bad investment of time. It's not time you'll get to the end of and say, well, I won't get that hour back. It's about doing things that are meaningful, useful and purposeful.
I'm actually learning quite a lot as well. So, literally, yes, it's for everyone else's benefit, but, I do rewatch them myself, I do take notes. And, that thing about when you were ironing earlier, and certainly when I'm going to force myself to do loads of ironing at once together from now on, it's just a way to sort of contemplate, where the world is at, what do we do about it, how can we keep moving forward, how do we help people, and what we're all going to sort of get off the back of those sort of actions, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, you make a good point there, Peter. It's sometimes asking yourself that, am I doing the thing that's going to be most useful to everybody in this exercise, or am I just doing it to earn a buck or get out of here quicker or to look good or whatever else it is? So giving freely of your time and thinking around these things is probably the most valuable gift you can offer to people. The trick is, I suppose, or the joy is, I suppose, when they engage with that and say, thank you, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. To go away and think about it. Salespeople over the years have been taught that when somebody says, that's great, thanks very much, I just need to think about it. They're taught, it's drummed into them to come straight back with, exactly what is it you need to think about? Perhaps I can help you with that. Is it the money? Is it the thing? Is it the... sometimes people just do need to look at their navel for a few minutes and go, yeah, I get that. I like that. I don't like it. I need to know more. You just have to trust that people are telling you the truth.
Yeah. Well, some people need to go home and speak to the partner about it. I know I certainly have to run every big decision past my wife. I'm not sure about you, but it's a joint decision, and particularly when it's a big one, I'm sure that individual has to go back and speak to their sort of stakeholders in the office and get everyone's sort of opinion about it. Do you have any questions for me? I feel like I've fired you quite a few.
I have been thinking about this, and I just wondered what advice you would give to people if. Let me pick a scenario. I'm a 1,000-seat techie engineering company. I've got a bit of a problem of stovepiping of thinking in my business. I'm sitting here in my C-suite, and I've got my IT guy and my HR person, they could all be guys and people and persons, and my facilities guy and my property team, my marketing people, and they all want a piece of me, and they all want a piece of the budget, and they all want to have a say in the direction. What advice would you give them on thinking about how they select the people that are the best fit for their business?
In terms of actually replacing the people they've got or recruiting some new people?
Yeah, I'm going to give you free rein on this, Peter. You can take everybody out of the equation and start again, but you've got the ear of the guy who's going to say yay or nay to it. But most important for him is, let's say, he does not want his business to stand still.
Yeah. Well, it's down to the recruitment company you use. Of course it is. That's the only choice. Look, however you go about sort of selecting new employees and recruiting them, it goes back to what you were talking about the thinking time. So it's about the planning at the front end first. What do they say about the Chinese and the Japanese? They spend sort of 70% plus time planning or thinking about something, and then 30% implementing. I know a lot of people in the UK that I deal with probably spend 99% of the time implementing, 1% of the time thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think the thing I can offer is, it's that old adage of time and money. People are busy. To do it themselves will actually cost them more money. I mean, just sat here now, in the last 13 weeks of, well, stood here now, in the last, I was going to say 13 weeks, I'm losing time up, 27 weeks of all the effort we've put in. You know, we've got 28,000 facilities managers all coded up in our database. We've spoken to a lot of them. I'm not going to say all of them, because physically we can only speak to so many people, compared to a in-house HRE sort of person who probably recruits IT, finance, support services, might have heard of facilities, may not have recruited it, would be just like using Peter Forshaw on day one of my career 20 years ago. I mean, literally, I've done nothing else for 20 years. So, the staff in the office take the mickey out of me, my wife does as well, because I can't remember anything outside of my life. So when I'm at home at the weekends, my wife will ask me a question, I haven't got a clue. Whereas ask me where someone lives who's sat on my database, and I'll know, you know, that place in Kent, I'll generally know what their wife or partner is called, probably know what the type of dog they have, and, you know, we've got that sort of in-depth knowledge of being sort of a niche sector specialist. I think, you know, and we've got integrity, we've got honesty, and, you know, clearly working for myself, I get up every day and want to do a good job. I mean, it'd be pointless doing a bad job, wouldn't it? It's just not going to help anyone. So, yeah, there you go. Does that answer your question?
It goes a long way, but there's never one answer and there's never an end to it, because the question's fairly open. But I'll ask you another. What do you think is the future opportunity for what we currently know as the facilities manager? And how do you think that role will have to evolve for them to stay viably useful?
I saw an article that was shared by Kathy from Magenta Associates. Hopefully Kathy has said that correctly in terms of your company name. And it was about what was the job title called? The home working officer, or the head of home working. We were talking about someone who has the property element, who has obviously the facilities element, who has the commercial sort of element, the IT element, all sort of moulded into one. There's an argument to say that's going to happen. Someone said to me quite recently, we're in a global pandemic. It's not bad economic policy, so ultimately this will go away, and things, you would hope, you know, if you look at the last 3 or 4 recessions that I've worked through, things always do return to, when I use that term you hate, new normal. So there's an argument to say nothing will change and everything will just remain, and people will just deal with the same problems they always have. It takes effort for an industry to evolve. This is the perfect opportunity for the industry to evolve. I'll be honest, Mark, I'm not being negative when I say this, but 50% of me thinks it'll probably just stay the same. And the other 50% will be sort of a hybrid of all those other elements we've talked about. I mean, if Twitter had come out and said they are going to allow every single employee to work from home forever, indefinitely, then surely they need to be looking at the working from home individual. But if an organisation is going to allow all their staff back to their offices, even if it's 50%, then the requirement for the facilities industry and facilities people is 100% still there. It will just mould and evolve and sort of go on that sort of that journey. But I think it is a time for us all to communicate and talk to each other and do things like this and share ideas, and hopefully off the back of some of those ideas, things can move forward more positively. But there is definitely going to be a demand, 100%.
I proposed a few years back that there might be a need for an animal which I called a chief of work, COW, cow, just so that I could put some funny pictures on LinkedIn on my post about it. But I kind of blended that thinking with Seth Godin's thinking of how do you make remarkable? You make remarkable by having a purple cow. If you drive to work in the morning, if you know his story, stop me. If you drive to work in the morning and you glance across the fields and you see a cow, you go, wow, that's nice, it's a cow. And you join the back of the traffic queue on the North Circular. You drive to work the next day and you see some Frisian cows in the field as well, and you go, oh my, how interesting, there's some regular brown cows and there's some black and white cows. Yeah, my day's just got brighter. Oh look, there's all those stoplights again. And then one day you go along and you look out across the field and there's a purple cow, and you stop, you get out and you take a picture because it's remarkable. I've had some people in the C-suite say, we don't identify that the people ahead of our professional strands, silos in our business. We don't feel any of them are remarkable. And we think there's time for either somebody to come in, step up, or change the language or the view or the ownership of translating the C-suite vision down to the troops on the ground that have to create the spaces, join the tech up and make it all work. And the chief workplace officer has been fairly common in a few places now. I think quite a few individuals have sort of adopted that as a nice little label for themselves because it feels a bit different and it's non-specific. It's great for consultants because they don't have to say they've got any allegiance in particular to HR, FM or IT. But I do see that coming through, as you said, maybe a head of working from home or workplace experience or whatever. And with chief people officers and those kind of labels out there, I wonder which of those silos is probably going to end up heading that, if it is any of them. Do you see HR taking the lead on that? Do you see FM taking the lead on that? Or will the IT take the lead on it?
I'm allowed to say this because I recruit in facilities, but generally, I don't know, could you argue that IT people are possibly a bit techie? Do they have the leadership skills? So I personally would suggest it's going to be a fight between HR and facilities, and maybe 50-50 depending on the organisation who the most senior people are. You know, ultimately the top. Interestingly, recently I've seen a couple of adverts for a head of facilities and HR. I've seen people head of HR and facilities. So ultimately the head of that department may be that one person.
We'll call it a COP then, the COPP, the Chief of People and Place.
I think between us, we're just deciding on the future of the industry.
I expect to see that on your website in the morning.
There in 10 minutes.
Good man. Seriously though, I think you know, for you guys, for your sector, very, very few I've had any interaction with, you being at the top of my go-to for that thinking at the moment, Peter. Very, very few that would be prepared to even sit down and take 10 minutes and put a LinkedIn article or something or post out there around that just to see what conversation it stimulated. And personally, I find that the most interesting thing about LinkedIn is that it does help unlock some of the thinking that's available to people just because you've given them something different. It's very relevant in property at the moment. I haven't jumped into too many around the people effect, other than I absolutely believe we need to trust people a little bit more, maybe not to go to Blackpool for the weekend, but definitely about how they select the places that they will do their best work in, because their best work will be meaningful to them, and that will give them joy. I'm sure somebody's written a book about the joy of work. In fact, I think they've written a sequel as well. So none of this stuff is new. It's just maybe emerging. And I made a note earlier that the COVID thing is being discussed as a potential accelerator for a lot of these changes. But it's got a life cycle, it's got a shelf life. And I think there's some other things out there that need to come along at the same time to put a little bit more meat into this change drive, I suppose. Maybe the conversation or the questions about who should be leading people and place conversations, and are they necessarily going to be the right people to then deliver it? As you said, Japanese and Chinese spend more time thinking than doing.
Yeah. Bob Daisley wrote The Joy of Work.
Couldn't remember. Thank you.
This I've been one of the things I've been doing at this particular moment, as well as everything else, is reading, you know, a lot of books about work, about sort of people, about how to get the best out of them, and there's so many interesting things out there. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. So what do you think is the biggest risk of not changing at a credible rate?
I think the answer to that is no one knows.
I'm sorry, you're not allowed that, Peter.
No one knows what's going to happen. That's I mean, the journalists and the members of parliament can come out and, you know, change the law and make us do certain things, which is fine, but no one really knows how long this is going to go on for, what the lasting effects are we going to get an antidote or a vaccine? Is that vaccine going to be safe? Is it going to wipe out half the population? You know, are a lot of the people who are approaching the end of their careers going to retire early? Are new people going to enter into our profession? If they are going to enter into a profession, how do you train them? You know, one of the difficulties at the moment I perceive is less experienced individuals, how they're dealing with working from home. Let's pretend they start a new journey with a new organisation. How are they getting trained? How do they learn what the culture of that organisation is if it's all via a Zoom or a Teams meeting?
I quite agree. And the fact that you're asking that question tends to make me want to tell you how to do your job in the nicest way. And that's like, just bolt on that HR FM thing and assume it's potentially the same animal, because I think they can cross disciplines quite easily.
I think they're really connected. I've realised that.
Yeah,
you know, that's part of my career. So well connected. FM is all about people.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're the one that's going to hack everybody off if you have to sit next to Mildred and she wants the window open and Harry wants it shut because his cactus is going to get drafty.
We could move Harry's cactus, couldn't we?
You want to move somebody's houseplant? Really? You want to go down that route?
Probably not.
Probably find it's not a real cactus, and actually it's his own personal Wi-Fi hub. It's a hotspot.
Yeah. And then if you move it, you'll pull all the wires out and it'll cause all end of problems.
There you go. Now, you wouldn't have had any of these difficulties if you'd strangled all those silos together and get them to talk about how do they deliver the seamless work experience, or some other such clever line. I think these conversations need to be broader. I'm very interested in the type of audience feedback you get from this kind of stuff, Peter. And I think somehow it would be so valuable for you to create some of the, to curate some of those findings, because there's an awful lot of consultants speak out there, and we did a survey and we discovered this, and I get bombarded with pop survey monkey things on, you know, what do you think about this return to work, and what do you think about this screening thing, and they're just crazy. They're just giving people an opportunity to say, we've asked some people and this is what they've said. And we know that a lot of the respondents, and generalising and risky statement, we generally sense that a lot of the respondents to these things are answering in a way that makes them feel good about their answers.
Yeah.
And when you're doing something like this, maybe not with me, but with others, and that is a live and genuine and honest, authentic response, and you get a response from that, I think it'd be easier for you to determine which resonates genuinely and which is people just jumping on, what do we call that thing, the top-heavy bandwagon. So I think there's some interesting feedback to come out of all ventures such as this, Peter. And I think it will definitely inform some of the conversations that I had as you look to give people the best opportunity for their next piece of work.
Yeah.
Let people find a way of doing that different thinking for themselves, but just trust them and allow them and give them space and choice. And in some respects, that all ties back into the porosity thing. When you're on your journey, when you're moving between different spaces, when your brain is adapting to having to work in different settings and with different people and having different experiences, that kind of slight unsettling just opens a few other doors as you become a little bit more aware of what's going on around you. you begin to tune into things a little bit differently. So if you just ask people to come into the same office every day and be a little bit more innovative, you're going to fail.
Just wanted to say massive thanks very much, Mark. Really enjoyed speaking to you. It's by far the longest one that I've ever done, but that's a positive rather than a negative. So thank you very much.